Okay, this time I have a review for Photomatix Pro 5.0.5, which at the time I'm making this video is the latest version. It's a program to deal with HDR images. So you can load bracketed images. So say you've taken 3 pictures, one at 0 exposure, one at -2, one at +3 or +2 or whatever. You can then load each of the images and blend them together as one image with as much high detail as possible, and this can be a way of avoiding blown out sunny skies. The Pro version also allows you to open a single RAW file, or you could open a single JPEG as well, and try and sort of create that kind of a look, that kind of HDR-ish, maybe painterly or surreal look, but you're not really going to get much benefit out of it, really. You're better off taking the pictures in 3 different exposures, or maybe 5 different exposures, or whatever, then blending them together. You can also batch process images as well. You can have the interface floating or unified. Unified is where pretty much all the little palettes, things like that, are going to be all confined within one interface together, whereas floating, you might have this strip here and then a preset strip, and you can drag them around independently and float them about. I don't tend to like that way of doing things. I prefer unified, so I'm going to leave it on unified. There's also a tutorial button here. Now let's have a look at the menu bar. We can look at About. This basically tells us the version. Like I say, it's the latest one at the time I'm making this review. We can check for updates. No update necessary, I'm using the latest version. And Preferences. Now under Preferences, we have Start Tone Mapping and Fusion with either previous settings you've used or default settings. When adjusting preview, refresh, when slider stops moving or a slider moves continuously. After displaying final image, do you want to show finished touches window, which basically allows you to apply a bit more sharpening to the image, etc. Upon tone mapping a single JPEG rather than bracketed, do you want the prompt to reduce noise reduction? And probably just leave it on, because if you don't want it, you can always hit no when it comes up anyway. Upon opening a 32-bit HDR file, do you want to show the HDR viewer? I might actually turn that on. Then Files, you have various options here, including default 32-bit HDR file format. Do you want to use just a normal floating point TIFF file? Do you want to use a .hdr, which I believe was the default setting when I installed the program, or a .exr? I would probably use this one. It is, from what I've looked, I'm only an amateur photographer, but from what I've found on the internet, EXR seems to have become the industry standard, and it seems like it creates a smaller file size as well, so I would probably use this. When you save an EXR file, do you want to use the software within the program, or do you want to use the Mac OS X's API? Now bear in mind that I didn't mention this earlier, but Photomatix Pro is on Windows as well, and if you have a Windows operating system, you should be able to follow along with this review and tutorial, because they should be pretty much the same. This will be different, of course, though. Default file name and some options there. Performance. How many CPU cores do you have? In this case, I have 2 cores but 4 threads, so I have the maximum available, which is 4. But if I wanted the program to use less, I could put it down to 2 or whatever. Or if for some reason this had a maximum of, say, 2, when I knew 4 was available, I could always turn it up to get best performance, but it seems to have detected it by itself adequately. Temporary file directory, default or custom, I just leave it at custom. You then have regular file menu, which is pretty much everything that's down here. Edit, automate, which is for doing the batch processing. This here won't be available to after you process the image. It's grayed out because there's no image loaded at the moment. I'll go back to that. Some other options here, which you'll probably need to show you later. Then from here you can get to online help, user manual, which is a PDF, and a tutorial. Let's load some bracketed images I took earlier today. They're not great. It's a bit overcast as well, but it should get the kind of point across. Unfortunately, my tripod is broken, so it's a bit tilted images. But here I've loaded the 3 images. One is at 0 exposure. My camera can go right down to either 1, 2, or 3, minus, or +1, +2, +3. But I did these at 0, minus, -2, and +2. So let's load them. Now, do you want the program to try to align the images? Well, this one I believe I actually took on the tripod, but I might actually want to use handheld because my tripod, unfortunately, I found today for some reason is broken, and I had to try to fix it a little bit myself, and it's a little bit wobbly. So I'm not sure which I should really pick here. I'll try tripod to begin with because technically I used a tripod. Do you want to crop aligned images? Let's just leave it off for now. Do you want to show options to remove ghosting? Yeah, why not? Especially since it may have moved a little bit. And what that does is if one of your images or several images was misaligned and they're not perfectly the same, you can try and line them up and fix them. Remove noise. Well, you can click this and go reduce noise on all underexposed images only, normal exposure and underexposed, or all of your images. Now, you can use this completely yourself. You can turn this on, select which one you want, and the strength. I tend to leave this off because I've actually reviewed a program previously by another company called Noiseless Pro, which is dedicated to removing noise from noisy images without degrading the image as much as possible, and it works so well. So if I need noise reduction, I'll probably create the final image here in Photomatix, then I will probably open the final TIFF or whatever in Noiseless Pro to do any noise reduction, so I'm going to leave that unticked. Do you want to reduce chromatic aberrations? And if we read down the bottom here, it says, this option attempts to correct for color, fringing due to the chromatic aberrations of the lens. Note that this will take more time to process the image. Now, my old camera, which was a bridge camera, a Fuji HS20, did suffer from this problem. The new camera, well, not new, I've had it for over a year, but the camera I currently have, the Sony A57, does not seem to really have much of a problem with chromatic aberrations. So I'm going to try and leave this off, then add it later if necessary. Now you have white balance. Do you want it as shot, auto, daylight, blah, 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 custom? Let's just have it as shot. I just tend to leave it like that. Then your color spaces. Now, if you have a really cheap camera, it may only take sRGBs, in which case you may as well have it on that because it ain't going to do you much good. Now, some more expensive cameras, like mine, have sRGB and Adobe RGB, and Adobe RGB is slightly better because it has a wider color space. So if you have that on your camera, I recommend you select this one, not that one. Take your picture as Adobe RGB and select it here. But if you have a really expensive camera, you may have a third option, Pro Photo RGB, which is even better again. So if you have this option, select it on your camera, make sure you take your pictures as that and select it here. In my case, my camera does not support that, so why bother? Let's have what we took the picture in. Now let's align and show deghosting image option. Now it's going to be converting the raw files. In this case, on a Sony, it's ARW. Here we go. This is the deghosting option. We can do selective, which means if we have a portion we know has moved, such as up here, maybe we can see a ghostly shadow on the branches, we can circle with a lasso tool and select that area and right click on it and add it to be deghosted, then preview it here. However, I don't see anything obvious like that, so I'm going to actually select automatic. Now, automatic, we can select ghosting, and it says how aggressive do you want it. Right, that's very strong. So let's put from none, let's put just very, very mild. Then the base image, which is your best image? I think it's selected this one. And let me say, yeah, that seems to be my 0 exposure one. I think I'll probably select that as the base image. Preview deghosting, off, on. That's it off, that's it on. Doesn't seem to have needed to do much anyway, so let's just turn previewing on and hit OK. Deghosting, merging into a HDR image file. That's going to take a minute. especially since we've used extra features such as deghosting. Wow, that it looks terrible. That's because it's on the default, which might be Painterly. I think it's Painterly, and Painterly may work quite well for some images. I did try one once that did look quite nice, but in fact, interior actually looks decent, even though it's called interior, which is obviously intended for an interior of a building. Let's have a look at surreal. Weird. Oh, so this isn't the most perfect image because it's tilted. It wasn't the most stable on my tripod because of tripod trouble. Let's have it at natural. Now, if you notice, there's only so many options here. That is because I'm under Fusion. Now, Fusion, I watched a video, and Fusion, they say it's the best option to go on if you want to create a very natural, realistic HDR image that looks real, true to life. But you may want to go to tone mapping and look at the options under tone mapping. In fact, natural under tone map. Oops, I'm not on tone. Okay, tone mapping. Oh, I see, because some presets are Fusion, and so it changes depending upon what you selected. But let's go to all here. Now we have default, which is a tone mapped image. That I'm going to actually reset. No, that looks okay, but I don't like it. Balanced, again, it's a tone mapping option. You're probably going to want to go to Fusion though. But let's take a look at a few. Photographic looks okay. Maybe the sky's a bit too bright. Natural, and there's all sorts here. I'm not going to look at them all, but let's have a look. There's vibrant, which actually doesn't look so vibrant in this case. Surreal, grunge, creative. Oh, I like that. That looks really sinister. Dark black sky, dark clouds, dark shadows. That is actually, I might save a version of this later because I like that. It's quite creepy. And there's lots of others: soft, smooth, and various black and white versions such as monochrome, black and white photographic, which is quite nice, black and white artistic, and natural. Now let's go to default. I'm actually going to select, because I want to try to make the most natural looking image I can. Let's go to Fusion. Now we have natural, Fusion, real estate, intensive, average, auto. Let's have a look at auto. Auto's not too bad, but you don't have any options if you need to edit it at all. Then we have Fusion 2 images, which basically is a fusion of two images. But let's have a look at average. Average, you don't really have any control over. Intensive, you get strength and the saturation of the color. Strength, you could look at as being the quantity of the effect. So say you selected a preset such as surreal from over here. It's how much of that effect do you want to use, almost kind of like a blend mode in Photoshop. How much opacity of that effect do you want? Do you want it 100% strong, the effect, or mild or weak? That's one kind of way of looking at it. It's kind of the strength. Well, like it said, it's the strength, it's the quantity of the effect. Color saturation, how much color do we want? Do we want to really brighten it? That's actually quite neat looking, actually. Or brighten it even more, which is ruining it. That's, you know, you could have it something like that, maybe this. And the radius, you probably got to mostly want to use the top two if you're using Fusion, natural or real estate. Natural is quite good, and I'm not quite sure why it's gone black and white. Okay, here we go. I've reset to the defaults for Fusion Natural. We have strength again, so we can turn this right up. I'm going to have it something not too strong, like maybe around 3. Then you have the brightness, and you have local contrast. You have white and black clip. You have monotone, and again color saturation. Now, these could be a little bit more intuitive, so let me just select, let me show you. Okay, this one here, real estate, is a bit more easy to understand for a beginner because you have highlights and your shadows. So you can brighten or darken your highlights, you can brighten or darken your shadows, and you know that's pretty obvious. You know, I think everybody knows what that means. If you want your shadowy areas darker, you darken it here. If you want the highlights like the sky brighter, you can brighten it here. Nice and obvious. But if you go from real estate to natural, you don't have highlights and shadows. I think the equivalent is brightness, and I think is it mid-tones or is it black clip? I think it's mid-tones, but whatever you say, it's not so obvious which is the highlights, which is the shadows. So let's see what we can actually do with this image. No, I'm not going to brighten it up. In fact, I might even darken it a bit for the sky. Let's have a look at what local contrast helps with. Okay, let's turn that down to maybe 2. Let's just try 2. Let's have a look at midtones. Yeah. What I'd like is in some photographic programs such as Affinity Photo and Photoshop, if you have change a slider to say this, then you want it to go back to whatever its default was, which I think was probably 0. You can double tap this and it'll reset to its default. Double tapping the slider doesn't seem to reset it in this program. Okay, color saturation. Let's brighten this image. It definitely needs a little bit of brightening. Maybe that's a little bit too extreme. Let's try around that. And you can see the general idea. Okay, and if you go to view, you can look at your histogram here, an 8-bit histogram, and see if it's how you want your histogram to look. And you can view it in red, green, or blue, or luminance here as well. Now let's say this is the image we actually really like. Well, you know what? Let's select creative. I've selected creative again. Now, one thing we have here under tone mapping, I've mostly been shown at Fusion, but if we have a look under tone mapping, not only do we have strength, which maybe we think, oh, that's a bit too over the top, let's turn it down a bit. In fact, I don't think that. I think that's probably quite good. Color saturation, you have tone compression, you also have detail contrast, and here you have your adjustments for lighting. Now, if we have lighting effects turned on, we have basically simple presets. We can have medium, which is what it's on at the moment. We can make it more surreal, or even more surreal again. We can have natural plus or natural. Well, medium it was before, natural. I'm going to have it on natural. But if we untick lighting effects, we get a slider so we can be more precise than ever with our lighting. But I'm going to put it on this and put it back onto natural. Under more options, we can hide this if we never want to change it, but we can smooth the highlights, we can adjust the white point, the black point, the gamma, the temperature. So if we want to make it more warm, like say a sunny day, we can, or we want to make it more blue and cold looking, which is what suits this image, we can. We can then hide more advanced options, or we can show them and look at them. And we have micro smoothing, we have saturation highlights, saturate the shadows, so we can saturate the colors and the shadows and the highlights separately from, say, your regular to standard saturation. We can smooth the shadows and shadow clipping from here. If this was a panoramic, we could use this option, which says eliminates a seam between the left and right sides of your panoramic image. But this isn't a panoramic, and I think probably if you're doing panoramas, you're probably going to be wanting to use more a dedicated panoramic program. This is really more for your tone mapping and your HDR work. Okay, so let's say that is the creative cloudy look we want, although something I've changed here has ruined my clouds. There we go. Let's darken the clouds a bit. Now we can hit apply once we have the image the way we want. It'll do its progress here with the tone mapping. And once it's progressed through, we on our final image can add contrast. We can add some mild contrast, extreme contrast, or none, and I would probably leave that alone. But if you are using it, you can get more options here to be more precise. Color, we can adjust the colors, and sharpening, and we can apply some sharpening such as mild sharpening. But what I would say here, I wouldn't mess with sharpening, contrast, and colors from here. I would leave this window alone. And that's it, just hit done. The reason I say that is because this is mostly for HDR. It's not exactly a full-fledged Photoshop or Lightroom, so I would do your main sort of HDR tone mapping, etc., using Photomatix. Then we can always open this up in Affinity Photo or Photoshop and add sharpening and any fine tweaks like that. Now we can double tone map it, so we can add another tone mapping on top of this. We can apply multiple layers of tone mapping. We can save the settings we've just used, or we can save the final image. I'm going to save the final image. And from here we can say save it to the desktop, give it a name, and we have JPEG, which, as you probably are aware, is a very compressed final format to say share on the internet. You probably going to want at least one copy that's TIFF 16-bit. Your camera may only take 8-bit pictures, but I would just save at least one copy of 16-bit just to make sure you have, even though the file will be bigger, as much data as possible in one of your images. We can then open it straight into that final image, straight into another program for further work, such as Affinity Photo, or if it's got a lot of noise, we can open it into Noiseless Pro. In this case, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to save it to the desktop. I go to the desktop. There you go. There's your final 16-bit TIFF. Now, a couple things I just quickly want to show you here is that was using a tripod, although, like I say, there was trouble with the tripod being quite wobbly because it's not in the best shape. But I took some handheld, so I'm going to load bracketed images. I am going to go to number 2 folder, and I'm going to load these bracketed images that I took handheld. Now, if you look, this one, and I think this one, no, I think basically this one here and this one here, number 54 and 56, are pretty well aligned, but then 55 goes right out of alignment because it's handheld, and I had to fiddle with the bracketing buttons while trying to hold it very still, and it didn't go so well. So I'm going to load it. Okay. I'm going to say, okay, it was handheld. And I'm just going to leave it at the defaults, because what I want to see here is how well it handles handheld, very shaky images. Okay, then for automatic, we can select the different ones here, but that's what it's tried to do. The bottom and sides have gone a bit wonky, but it looks like there's very little ghosting. There is a little bit up here, I can see, maybe a little bit on the close peg. Let's have a look at selective and let's see what we can do. Let's draw around this image. Let's right click and mark it as a ghosted image. I'm going to do a same sort of thing here as well and mark it as a ghosted image. Now let's preview. I think it's fixed the close peg. I think it's made perhaps this pole worse. Return. Definitely the close peg is fixed now anyway. So let's OK that. It's merging into a HDR now. And there we go. Again, you would want to try to play around a lot with that pole. He still looks a little ghosted, but the close peg is fixed. And considering this is 3 different exposures taken handheld, it could be far, far, far worse. So it actually has done a decent job here. And if I didn't mention earlier under tone mapping, you have methods such as detail enhancer, contrast enhancer, or tone compressor, which will get you some very different effects and slightly different sliders. But I'm just going to close out of that. Close out of this. I'm going to show you loading a single image that you only have one image of and is at one exposure. You don't have multiple exposures. let's select here. This is an English post box just outside of Hampton Court's entrance. It's only one image at one single exposure. It is RAW file though. Now, because this is a single image, we may actually want to let it do a little bit of its noise reduction first. But yeah, let's leave it on. We'll leave this on. Well, no, actually, I think this image has very slight chromic aberrations around a tree branch, so I will leave this on. I'm going to leave the rest at default, and I'm going to enable exposure fusion because we can turn this off, but I like to use this mode, so let's leave it on. Converting the RAW file now, enabling fusion. Noise reduction. Now this is one RAW file without any other exposures, basically zero compensation for the exposure. We can select our presets here. We have default, which is okay, not great. We have balanced, which looks a bit dark. We have photographic, we have natural. Let's just go to default and reset the defaults. Not too bad. Let's try strength for a minute. What's this going to do? Actually make it a bit too dark. Let's have it at around 40. Let's have a look at color saturation. I want this up a little bit, but perhaps not that much. Let's leave it at that for now. Lighting. Natural. Now let's have a look here at contrast. I think this is the problem with this image. On the default settings, it isn't very bright. Let's brighten it up a teeny bit here. Perhaps this is a bit overboard. Let's have 3, then maybe let's have a look at color saturation again. He looks a bit too saturated, but now it's not. Let's have a look. Maybe like about this, and maybe turn this up again a bit more. Well, anyway, you see the idea. And you can go to things like, well, creative is a bit absurd. Let's try like grungy. So you can create a HDR mimic. You can mimic the HDR look from a single RAW file or even a single JPEG. RAW is going to be better for obvious reasons, but you can then create this sort of painterly look out of an image that is not technically a HDR image. As you can see here, we do have a lot of chromatic aberrations in this image. I don't know why when I don't normally have this problem, so we can always hit apply. We can say no to that. We can go here and we can actually tell it to do it again. Hasn't really made much difference. I've noticed that before doing it after the fact. So you can always open this up in some other programs such as Lightroom, Photoshop, Affinity Photo, and use its tools, which might get that done a bit more, take it out a bit more. Or as this is the Pro version, it has a plugin for Lightroom and Photoshop, so you could actually have this in Lightroom first, remove noise and chromatic aberrations first, then take the corrected image from Lightroom or Photoshop and put it to Photomatix and not have the problem with this to begin with from the start anyway. This does have a plugin, the Pro version anyway, for Lightroom, Aperture and Photoshop, but Aperture has now been discontinued by Apple, so it would be good if they made a plugin for this for the new program called Affinity Photo. It's not by Apple themselves, it's a third-party program, but it's a lot like Photoshop, but it's really good. It costs £30 to £40 in the UK, so and it's not a subscription. With Photoshop, you now have to pay a subscription each month, and it's quite a bit from what I can remember. But with Affinity Photo, it's a really great program, only for Mac. It's a lot like Photoshop, but you pay £30 or £40, depending upon if it's on sale or not, and you get it forever. It's really good, so it'd be good if they had a Affinity Photo plugin for Photomatix. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a look at the website and see the different versions available for you and the pricing. Okay, we're on HDRsoft.com, the website of the people who make Photomatix. As you can see, you can view a gallery and have a look at some sample images, and sometimes they run contests as well. So there's some user-submitted HDR work. You can then look at video tutorials. There isn't a huge amount. There's a basic one here and a basic one for the non-pro version. You can look at taking bracketed photos, and that will open a new page, but they only have 3 Canon models, 3 Nikon, and Pantex, or whatever they're called. Well, maybe using one of these you can get an idea how to do it on any Canon or any Nikon. However, it's a pity there isn't at least Sony, as they have really become very popular now since the Sony A7 and A7R and A7S came out, which has really good features and great noise reduction, great ISO abilities in low light, and really high. You can have really high ISO settings, turned on without suffering much noise. They're really good. I haven't got the A7, but they are really good. I've even heard of many photographers who have been using Canon for years, such as the Canon 5D Mark II, swapping to the Sony A7. So it'd be good to see some Sonys here, at least the A7 models. Okay, let's close this tab. Now we can also go to resources, and we have some videos by third parties. This is the video I watched. It's about an hour 15 minutes, and it's about creating HDR images but using a realistic look. So it doesn't look all grungy or surreal. It looks natural, and that is where I learned that you're best off using the fusion mode, not the tone mapping mode. So that one there at least is worth watching, and there's some others, including links to some popular books here as well. Now if you go to purchase, it costs about £72 in the UK, and I think in America it's $99. Or you can get Essentials, which works with Photoshop Elements, for about $46. You can get a bundle which has a little bit of all their stuff here for about $142. They also have a tone mapping plugin without the rest of the program, just a plugin for tone mapping. It looks like here for quite a lot, though. I'm not sure why you'd want that over the main Pro program. Here's a plugin for Aperture, although I can see that probably being discontinued eventually because Aperture has Apple no longer updates Aperture. They have a more basic program which are gradually adding more features to, called Photos, which came out with Yosemite. And so I would rather see a plugin for Affinity Photo personally. So there are your options. Basically, your main options are: do you want Essentials, which it says if you want to create HDR photos and adjust them to get the look you want. And here you have this one with advanced tools such as selective noise ghost removal. You won't have selective ghost removal if you only get the Essentials. Let's look at a feature comparison quickly before we finish up. Here's the difference between these 3 versions. Number of bracketed photos. You can load up to 5 in Essentials, which is, I think, for most people's needs perfectly fine, because most people use 3 brackets. They use 0 and either +2 and -2, or +3 and -3. But some people do take 5, but I don't know many people really. I don't really think most people take more than 5, so that's fine. But you do have unlimited with Pro. Advanced Details Enhancer in Pro version, not available in Essentials. Exposure Fusion with Real Estate Interior preset is not available in Essentials. sharpening and contrast and finishing touches. Like I said, I wouldn't probably do it in this program anyway, but it's available in both, so that's fine. Undo tone mapping and fusion in both, but if you are somebody who has got lots of images they want to turn into HDR, but they haven't taken them at multiple exposures, they only have a single raw file, well, you can't do that in Essentials. You can only do fusion from a single raw file in Pro. Automatic alignment of handheld photos, which can be great, it's actually in both, which is quite good. Adjusting of automatic ghosting is only available in Pro. Selective ghosting only available in Pro. Thumbnails of custom presets, for some reason, is only in Pro. I don't see why that can't be in Essentials, but whatever. And display options for preset thumbnails only in Pro. Batch, you can only do a batch process of images in Pro. Chromatic aberration reduction is only in Pro. Again, I might do that in a separate program anyway, but still take note that it is only in Pro if you're thinking of getting Essentials. And opens and saves in 32-bit HDR image formats only in Pro. Integration with Lightroom with a free plugin only in Pro. And neither of those require a host application, only the plugin, which because that is made for Photoshop. So I hope that has been helpful. Little basic sort of look, basic tutorial as well as a review. I think it's a great program to create HDR images out of bracketed photos. If you're unsure about it still, there is a trial version, a free trial available on their website for Windows and Mac, and the same for Essentials. So you can even try out them both and see. You might start with downloading the trial Essentials and see if it does everything you need, and if not, you can always download the trial Pro and go from there. So remember that a free trial is available, and I recommend you do try it first before you buy it. And if you have any questions, if you could add it to the comments along with this YouTube video, and I'll try to get back to you. Please like and share this video, and if you could do me a huge favor and subscribe, as it only take a few seconds and will help me out a lot. Thanks for watching.